here's the last one. This is the only one out of this whole list that I think is really significant. All right. So this is the Jews returning to Jerusalem. Okay. Do you know this part, this history? Okay. So the Jews, so in AD, well, let me show you the scripture first. Okay. So here, this comes from Isaiah 11. And it says this, then it will happen on that day that the Lord will again recover his hand the second time. The remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he will lift up a flag for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel, and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Okay, so the idea here is that the Jews who had been dispersed all over the earth will come back to Jerusalem. And I believe this is true. I believe that this was a prophecy, and that's exactly what it meant, that the Jews would return. Well, that happened in 1948. So in 1948, the Jews were allowed to come back and set up the nation of Israel again after almost 2,000 years of having no Jerusalem, no state of Israel. And so back in AD of 70, so AD 70, okay, so only 40 years after Jesus was on the earth and then ascended back up into heaven, the Romans came and they completely demolished Jerusalem. Completely. I mean, they tore it up. So they demolished, destroyed the temple, the Jewish temple, so completely that there were not two stones left standing on top of each other, just like Jesus told the disciples in Matthew 24. And that was in AD 70. And during that time, during that siege, when Jerusalem was destroyed, the Romans murdered and tortured over 1 million Jews. 1 million. This was in AD 70. Do you know how many people 1 million was back then, as opposed to when you compare it to the population at that time? I mean, that was a lot of people. And there were very few Jewish people left after that. And so the ones who were left, they were scattered all over the earth. And they remained that way with no homeland for almost 2,000 years until 1948. And I think it's hard to understand just how miraculous, what a big miracle this was for the Jewish people. There, never in the history of humankind has there ever been another people group who have been so destroyed and scattered all over the world, and yet have been able to maintain their identity as Jewish people, as whatever their kind of people they were, and then be able to return to their homeland and set up their state, their country again, and Jerusalem again. So that happened in 1948. So I believe that's huge. That's significant. So, and that needed to happen to fulfill this prophecy before Jesus could come back. But that happened, almost 80 years ago, 76 years ago. So again, that's cool. It's awesome. That's an amazing thing. But you can't hold that up to say, wring your hands and say, oh, no, it's all this thing. Terrible things are happening. Jesus is coming back tomorrow, because that happened almost 80 years ago.